need to check the used names file and then write a completely new story. The names to avoid are all listed in the document. Let me write a fresh story with new names. I sold my landscaping business for $41 million on a Tuesday in October. I remember the exact day because it was also my 63rd birthday, and my son called to say he couldn't make dinner. Something came up at work, he said. He'd make it up to me. He didn't. 3 weeks later, I took him and his wife out to celebrate anyway. My idea, I made a reservation at Harrington's, which is the kind of restaurant in Scottsdale where the tablecloths cost more per yard than most people's dress shirts, and you don't look at the right side of the menu. I'd been there twice in my life. Once when I closed my first major commercial contract in 1998, and once when my wife and I celebrated our 30th anniversary, 2 years before she passed. I wanted to mark this moment the same way, with the people I loved, with good food and a quiet room. My son's name is Dominic. He's 34. His wife is Leanne. I want you to understand something before I go further. I am not a man who had a difficult relationship with his child. I was at every baseball game. I paid for his college, his first car, his wedding, the down payment on his house in Tempe. When his landscaping side business failed in 2019, I didn't say a word about it. I just covered the debt, $42,000, and told him to get back up. I thought that was what fathers did. I thought a lot of things. The night at Harrington's started the way those nights do. Valet parking, a corner booth, the kind of low lighting that makes everyone look a little better than they are. Dominic wore a blazer. Leanne had on a dress I didn't recognize. They seemed happy. We ordered wine. I told them about the sale, about the buyer, a regional property development group out of Phoenix, about the lawyers and the closing process, and how strange it felt to sign your name 40 times and walk out knowing something you built over 31 years now belonged to someone else. Dominic asked the right questions. How much liquidity do you have now? What are you doing with the money? Are you working with a financial advisor? He had always been interested in the business. I figured that was a good thing. Somewhere around the second glass of wine, Dominic said he needed to use the restroom, and Leanne asked if I wanted to split the ribeye. Normal conversation. Normal dinner. I excused myself a few minutes later to find the host and ask about a cake I'd arranged to have brought out. It was my birthday after all. I'd treated myself. And when I came back to the table, a man in a dark vest was standing near my chair. He introduced himself quietly. His name was Marcus, he said, a floor supervisor at Harrington's, not a waiter. He had a calm way about him, the way certain people do when they've learned to deliver bad news without flinching. He said, "Sir, I want to let you know, and I apologize if I'm overstepping. I saw your son pour something into your drink while you were away from the table. I don't know what it was, but I thought you should know before you sat back down." I stood there for a moment. I remember thinking very clearly he has the wrong table. Then I looked at my glass. The ice had shifted slightly. Something was different about the color. Maybe I was imagining it. I thanked Marcus. I told him I heard him. I asked if he could quietly hold the glass without disturbing anything at the table, and he nodded like he'd been waiting for exactly that response. Then I walked back to the booth and told Dominic and Leanne that I was feeling a headache coming on, that I was sorry, that we'd reschedule. I hugged them both. Leanne said I should drink more water. Dominic said drive safe. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 22 minutes. I am 63 years old. I have buried my wife. I have had employees steal from me, vendors lie to me, a business partner tried to cut me out of a deal in 2007 that I spent 8 months untangling in court. I thought I had seen most of what people were capable of. I had never once considered that my own son would be on that list. I calls my attorney that same night. Her name is Phyllis, and she has handled my affairs for 16 years. I told her what happened. She didn't try to soften it or suggest I might be misreading things. She just said, "Don't touch anything in writing until we talk and get the glass tested." Marcus had the presence of mind to have the glass transferred to a sealed evidence bag through the restaurant manager. I didn't know people outside of procedural crime dramas did things like that, but apparently Marcus had some background in loss prevention before Harrington's, and he understood the chain of custody. He handed it to me in the parking garage before I left. I put it in a paper bag on the passenger seat and drove home and set it on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a while. I sent it to a private lab in Tempe the next morning. While I waited for the results, I went about my life. I kept my phone calls with Dominic normal. I answered his texts. 2 days after the dinner, he asked how I was feeling. The headache had passed, I told him. "Great," he said. He suggested we get lunch soon and talk about some investment ideas he'd been looking into. I said sure, sounded good. I want to tell you how that felt. It felt like being in a room where the floor might not be real, but you keep walking anyway because you don't know what else to do. The lab results came back in 11 days. The substance was lorazepam, a benzodiazepine, the kind used to treat anxiety and seizures. In low doses, it makes you drowsy. In higher doses, particularly combined with alcohol, it can cause blackouts, respiratory depression, dangerous drops in blood pressure. In a man my age with my mild heart history, a sufficient dose combined with 2 glasses of wine could look, in the worst circumstances, like a medical event. Something that might happen to a 63-year-old man dining alone on the night his business sold. I read the report 4 times. Then I closed my laptop and went outside and sat in my backyard and watched the sun go down over the McDowell Mountains. I did not cry. I'm not sure why. Maybe I had already started grieving somewhere I couldn't feel. Phyllis referred me to a private investigator, a former Maricopa County detective named Roy, quiet and efficient. I told him what I needed. I said I wanted to know if this was an isolated moment of bad judgment or something planned. I said I wanted to know the full picture before I did anything at all. Roy nodded and said he'd need 2 weeks and access to some of my business records for context. I gave him both. What Roy found over the following 3 weeks was not one thing. It was a timeline. It started 14 months before the dinner at Harrington's, around the time word began circulating in certain local business circles that a few of the larger regional landscaping companies were starting to consolidate, and that my business, one of the oldest commercial landscaping operations in the East Valley, might be an attractive acquisition target. Someone had apparently been paying attention to that information and working backward. Dominic had met twice with an estate attorney I had never heard of, a man based in Gilbert who specialized in what Roy described diplomatically as expedited estate restructuring. Leanne had begun researching power of attorney documents. There were calls to a financial advisor in Scottsdale, not my financial advisor, a different one, about what happens to an estate when the primary holder becomes incapacitated. Incapacitated. I had given Dominic a key to my house years ago. In the summer before the dinner, he had used it on 2 occasions when I was traveling. Roy couldn't determine what he'd looked for or found, but he'd been there. There was more, a conversation Leanne had with her sister, retrieved through means I won't specify but which Roy assured me were legal, in which he referred to the situation as almost over and mentioned something about a timeline tied to when the deal closes. The deal being my sale. They had been waiting for the sale. They had been waiting for the 41 million to exist in liquid form tied to my name before anything happened to me. I sat with Roy's full report for 3 days before I called Phyllis. Here is the decision I made, and I want to explain it because I've thought about it every day since. I chose not to go to the police immediately. I know how that sounds. I know some people reading this will think I should have called 911 the night Marcus came to my table. Maybe they're right, but here is where I was. The lab results confirmed the substance, but proving intent, proving that Dominic, specifically, administered it with the purpose of harming me, was a harder legal road than it looks from the outside. Lorazepam is not exotic. Dominic could claim he was trying to calm me down, that it was a stupid decision, that he panicked about something, that he found the pill on the table and didn't think. People have argued their way out of more than that. What I had was not nothing, but in a courtroom with a good defense attorney and the right jury, it might feel like less than it was. What I had that was unassailable was my estate. I rewrote my will the same week I read Roy's report. Completely. My previous will, written 12 years earlier, had left nearly everything to Dominic, a fairly standard arrangement for a widower with one child who had no reason to imagine otherwise. The new will left him $1, which is the customary way of demonstrating that the omission was intentional and not an oversight. The remainder was distributed among 3 beneficiaries: a scholarship fund at Arizona State in my late wife Sandra's name, a land conservation trust in Yavapai County that Sandra had donated to for years, and a small foundation I set up for the families of employees who had worked for my company for more than a decade. I moved my liquid assets out of any accounts Dominic had any peripheral access to or knowledge of. I had the locks changed on my house. I had a security system installed, cameras at every entrance, cloud-stored footage, and then I waited. Dominic called about the investment lunch 3 more times. The 3rd time I agreed to meet him. We sat at a cafe in Old Town Scottsdale on a Thursday afternoon, and he laid out what he was thinking. A real estate partnership, he said, an opportunity in the West Valley. He needed a capital partner, and who better than family? He had a folder. He printed projections. I let him finish. Then I said, "Dominic, before we talk about any of that, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to think about your answer before you give it." He said, "Okay." I said, "What did you put in my drink at Harrington's?" The silence that followed was about 4 seconds long. I counted. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I put Roy's summary on the table. Not the full report, just the summary. The lab results. The dates of his visits to my house. The name of the estate attorney in Gilbert. The phrase, "almost over," from Leanne's conversation. He looked at the papers for a long time. He didn't confess. I want to be honest about that. He said it wasn't what it looked like, that I was misinterpreting things, that he and Leanne had just been trying to get organized because they worried about me since Sandra died, that the drink thing was a misunderstanding that he could explain. He started to cry, real tears, the kind I had seen from him since he was a small boy. And I will tell you honestly, that part was hard. It was hard because I still loved him. I think I always will, in the way that is separate from trust or respect or safety, the way you can love a place after a fire has gone through it. I said, "I've already changed the will. I've already moved the accounts, and I need you to understand something. If you make any legal move against this estate, if you contest anything, if you so much as call Phyllis's office uninvited, I will hand everything Roy found to the Scottsdale Police Department and the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, and I will let the process run wherever it runs." He went very still. I said, "I don't want that for you. I genuinely don't. But I will do it." We sat there for a few more minutes. The cafe was noisy around us, people ordering coffee and discussing their days, completely unaware. I paid the check. I stood up and put on my jacket. He said, "Dad," I said, "take care of yourself, Dominic." I drove home. In the months since, he has not called Phyllis. He has not contested anything. He and Leanne sold their Tempe house and moved out of state. Someone told me Denver, though I haven't verified that. I got a text from him in February that said only "I'm sorry." I looked at it for a long time before I put my phone face down on the table. I have not responded. I don't know yet if I will. People ask me sometimes how I feel about the way this ended. Friends who know pieces of the story. My brother-in-law who knows most of it. They want to know if I feel vindicated, or peaceful, or angry, or what. The honest answer is that I feel none of those things in a clean way. I feel older. I feel the particular kind of loneliness that comes from knowing that the person you raised, the one you watched grow from a child who used to fall asleep on your chest watching baseball, looked at your life and saw a transaction. I feel the absence of something I thought I had. A version of my family, a version of my son, that maybe only existed in the story I was telling myself. I also feel clear-eyed in a way I didn't expect. There's a kind of grief that cleans you out when it's done. You see your life without the thing you lost, and you realize you still have a life. The money is still there. The mountains are still visible from my backyard. I volunteer Tuesday mornings at a food bank in Mesa, and I've started hiking again on the weekends with a group that meets at the Peralta Trailhead. Small things, real things. I am not at peace with what happened. I'm not sure that's available to me yet, but I am here. I am paying attention. And I know, which is more than I knew a year ago, exactly who I can trust. That turns out to matter more than the 41 million. I would have traded every dollar to have been wrong about him. I wasn't. I've spent a lot of time since that Thursday afternoon in Old Town trying to figure out what I actually learned from all of this. Not the obvious things. Lock your accounts. Change your locks. Know where your will stands. Those are practical lessons, and they matter, but they're not the ones that stayed with me when the house was quiet at night. What stayed with me was something harder to name. I raised Dominic to believe that comfort was a right. Every time he struggled, I removed the struggle. Every time he failed, I absorbed the failure. I thought I was being a good father. I thought generosity meant protection. What I didn't understand, what I see clearly now, is that when you never let a person experience the full weight of their own choices, you don't protect them, you hollow them out. You build someone who knows how to receive but has never had to become anything. And a person like that, when real pressure arrives, when real desire arrives, doesn't have the interior structure to handle it with any kind of integrity. I'm not saying what Dominic did was my fault. I want to be precise about that. He made choices. He sat across from me at a dinner I arranged to celebrate something I'd spent 31 years building, and he made a calculation. That belongs to him, but I've had to be honest with myself about the conditions I helped create. That's not self-punishment. That's just looking at the full picture without flinching. There's something I've come to believe about how consequences work in a human life, not in any mystical sense. just observationally, from 6 decades of watching people make decisions and live inside those decisions. The things we do out of fear, or greed, or a deep unwillingness to earn what we want, they collapse inward eventually, not because the universe is keeping score, but because that kind of action requires you to become smaller to sustain it. You have to lie more. You have to manage more. You have to be less of yourself every day to keep the architecture standing. Dominic and Leanne spent over a year building something that was always going to fall on them. I didn't destroy it. It destroyed itself the moment Marcus walked over to my table. The courage I'm most proud of in this whole story is not confronting Dominic at that cafe. It's the 3 weeks between the dinner and the lab results, when I didn't know for certain and I still had to decide what kind of person I was going to be while I found out. That period, sitting with the possibility that my son had tried to hurt me, not acting on it yet, not collapsing under it, just staying steady and methodical and clear, that required something I didn't know I had until I needed it. I think that's what resilience actually is, not toughness in the movie sense, just the willingness to stay in the room with an unbearable truth long enough to understand it before you do anything about it. If I have anything useful to say to anyone who has found themselves in a version of this kind of story, betrayed by someone they loved, by someone they trusted completely, it's this: the sharpest thing you can do is not react from the wound. The wound will heal at its own pace regardless. What you control is whether you act with clarity or whether you act from pain. Acting from pain gives the person who hurt you a second way to damage your life. Acting with clarity takes that away from them entirely. I would have traded the 41 million to have been wrong about Dominic. I've said that, and I meant it every time. But I wasn't wrong. And I'm still here. That turns out to be enough to build on.